The Hauraki Gulf has long been the sparkling jewel in our Pacific crown, but have we loved it to death?
Crayfish are functionally extinct, scallop, mussel and paua are in decline, and 22% of seabirds are threatened.
We're seeing real declines, habitat loss, biodiversity loss, so we need to act fast, and this bill is a step in the right direction.
That bill is the Hauraki Gulf Tīkapa Moana Marine Protection Act, which has just come into force to combat the Gulf's slow burn crisis.
The passing of legislation to boost protections in the Hauraki Gulf is being both celebrated and criticised.
Legacy says the legislation's been watered down and politicised.
The fundamental issues with what's happening to the Hauraki Gulf haven't really been addressed.
We're pretty disappointed that it went through.
So what's the problem? Why the criticism? Kia ora, I'm Amanda Gillies, and today on The Detail, the new law that almost triples the protected area in the Hauraki Gulf. The Gulf is, of course, our largest marine park at more than 1.2 million hectares, surrounding Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula. But the bill's celebrations have been muted by an 11th hour compromise, which allows commercial fishing to continue in some areas.
From a science perspective, there's really no justification for making these changes.
If you just have straight-out commercial exploitation in a so-called high protected area, there is a glaring contradiction. I think it's thoroughly bad.
Today I talked to Simon Thrush, Professor of Marine Science at Auckland University, and Auckland Councillor for Waitemata and Gulf Mike Lee about the new law, which Simon says has been a long time coming.
Creating this new bill took a very long time. It goes back almost to the creation of the Hauraki Gulf Marine Protected Area, which was in 2000. And this is too slow. We need to move into a space where we're starting to do things in a much more agile way. We need to fast-track conservation in the ocean.
And the chances of that happening?
Well, we've fast-tracked some other things very quickly recently, so why can't we do that as well?
Now, the new law increases areas under some form of protection from 6 to 18%. This is done by extending 2 existing marine reserves and adding 12 high protection areas, or HPAs, and 5 seafloor protection areas. But what exactly does this mean?
In both cases, it's about limiting the access to these areas to fishers of different kinds. So seafloor protection means that you are not able to use dredges, which we would use recreationally and commercially for collecting animals like scallops, or you're not allowed to use trawls, which is mainly a commercial activity in New Zealand, to fish for animals that hang out near the seafloor because that's where their food supply is. So thinking of things like gurnard and snapper and trevally and so forth. The high protection areas exclude fishing completely. So that means no wreck fishing or no commercial fishing. The exception is that there is allowance for customary take. So these areas are not the same as the areas set up under the Marine Reserves Act from the late 70s, and they do allow for Maori to be thinking about how they manage their rohe moana and how they fulfil their kaitiakitanga responsibilities.
The expected payoff for the Gulf, so if these protections work, and I'm talking sort of in terms of fish numbers, biodiversity and the sort of seabed health, what can we expect to see and how soon could we see it?
Yeah, so what we could expect to see is more fish in the Gulf in general. We could expect to see the recovery of some habitats that have been impacted by disturbance, and that will mean probably better habitat for a bunch of juvenile fishes, definitely an increase in biodiversity. All of those, I think, are good things. Timing is really hard to judge. some of the modelling work I've been involved with would indicate that for the deeper regions of the Gulf that have been impacted by trawl fisheries, we might be talking about multiple decades, possibly even a century, to see full recovery of those areas. But, predicting those things is really difficult because it relies on a whole series of phenomena to come into play at the right time. And often when those windows of opportunity are missed, then recovery can be slowed until the next window comes along. So it's really hard to know. And I think the other upside of it is that there are areas where the diversity and habitat complexity has been eroded over time, and that erosion will stop. So that will really help. As long as these areas are being respected, then that happens today.
So that's the good news. But as mentioned, the Act has also come under fire from critics who claim it's less about high protection and more about hollow promises.
Recreational fishing advocacy group Legacy are criticising the new Hauraki Gulf Tīkapa Moana Marine Protection Act. They are accusing the government of creating exclusive zones for commercial fishing. Legacy says the legislation's being watered down and politicised.
Some recreational anglers who've been banned from their favourite fishing spots aren't happy that the door's been left ajar for some commercial fishing in two of the Hauraki Gulf's HPAs.
I'm really nervous about these HPAs because they actually create a dangerous precedent. The government has said it's okay for commercial fishing to continue inside a high protected area. Not only have we created that precedent, we've actually created exclusive commercial fishing zones.
Critics say that, this amendment was rushed through rather late and sort of undermines trust. From a marine science sort of perspective, what are the dangers, do you think, Simon, of sort of political compromises at the 11th hour?
From a science perspective, there's really no justification for making these changes. On the international front, these changes, they don't meet the standards, the IUCN standards that allow them to be included in us meeting or getting close to meeting this 30% marine space conserved by 2030 that comes from the UN. So that doesn't really help us because we're really going to struggle to meet that anyway. It is very short term in its action, and there's not a lot of kind of scientific logic behind the decision, I would say.
Realistically, this 30% by 2030, is that pie in the sky now? Is there any way we can achieve that?
I think we can if we stop messing around and just get on with it. But if we engage in these processes at the speed at which we've implemented the Hauraki Gulf Marine Protection Bill, there's no way we'll come near that. But then, as we do this, we need to be really thinking about moving into a future where we're relying more and more on the support that nature gives us in terms of the provision of dealing with our wastes, providing us with oxygen, providing us with food, providing us with places that improve our well-being. All of those things matter, and just ignoring the ocean just doesn't really help the ocean deliver those things to us. So even if your view on these things is entirely selfish and human-centric, it's important that we do these things.
Do you think right now that our ecological priorities are perhaps diluted by politics? Do you think that's fair?
Yes, at the moment we seem to have a focus on short-term economic gains, which are important, but thinking about our natural environment and thinking about how it sustains us and how we manage it and benefit from it is a strategic priority that we ignore at our peril.
The government says the new legislation balances the needs of communities, the environment and the economy. This was Conservation Minister Tama Potaka after the bill was passed.
But we got through the legislation. I'm absolutely thrilled that we now tripled the protection of a wonderful space called Te Pātaka Kaia, Tīkapa Moana.
But Auckland Councillor and Waiheke Island resident Mike Lee disagrees, saying the new protection simply doesn't go far enough.
Their protected status, I have to say, is open to question. The high protection areas are also reserved for Māori customary fishing, and that the scale and the nature of that remains to be determined. But also, even those so-called high protected areas also have been enabled to have commercial exploitation, commercial fishing therein. There is plenty of scope for crayfish potting, paua, harvesting, and so on. So not even the seafloor protected areas are not really protected as such fully, and certainly the sea space above is certainly not protected either. And so this government the government of New Zealand, I should say, has committed to protect 30% of New Zealand's coastal and marine area. And one wonders whether there's a bit of spin going on here in terms of the equivocation around the word protection. That's my concern.
It should be noted that Mike is chair of the Friends of the Hauraki Gulf, a conservation group which has been working on parallel marine protection for the central Hauraki Gulf. He says the Department of Conservation reviewed their proposal. He believes it was given a tick of approval and passed on to government a year ago. But there's not been much word since.
We actually argued that here is a marine reserve proposal that has gone through a full public notification process and due scrutiny, and why not fold that in as well, along with the two other marine reserves that you've expanded, but they decided not to do that.
Disappointed?
Oh, always disappointed, but we always keep our hopes alive on this. We'll keep on pushing for this because this is an issue which the general public, from my experience, are well ahead of the politicians in their awareness of how essential it is to protect our marine environment, particularly the marine environment of the Hauraki Gulf. So public awareness seems to be, for some reason, superior to that of the political class. So there is public support for it because the ordinary people recognise the need for no-take protection, no-take for everyone.
What is your take then, Mike, on the fact that this 11th hour decision to allow some commercial fishing to be done in some of these protected areas? What's the fallout of that?
I think it's thoroughly bad because even as originally constituted, the notion of high protection, as stated in the legislation, is questionable. But you could argue, well, it's different, customary fishing is different, and make an argument along those lines. But if you just have straight-out commercial exploitation in a so-called high protected area, there is a glaring contradiction, and I'm just concerned that at some stage a New Zealand government will go to the United Nations and say, yes, we've met our commitments to protect 30% of our coastal marine area or our exclusive economic zone, and we've done it, but actually it's not really protected at all. So it's something like if you like, Clayton's protection. That's the problem.
Interestingly, at the weekend I saw a post, and it was from the Coromandel, and there was a commercial boat spotted in an area that everyone thought that was going to be off limits initially under this new law, and the locals were wild. Do you fear or worry about local retaliation or fallout from this? You know, the recreational fishers kept out, but the commercial ones allowed in?
Yes, obviously there's a lot of passion around marine protection and recreational fishing and commercial fishing, and I think it's sensible to recognise the validity of all those points of view and customary fishing as well. All of those are valid concerns, but if you're going to spend this long on producing legislation, you should get it right, and leaving things open to argument, creating precedent by enabling commercial exploitation in a protected area, you're actually making trouble in a way, or leaving things open to controversy and disputation. going into the future, and that's the last thing you want. The whole idea of protection, of nature protection, is this is for nature. Normal exploitation, commercial exploitation activity stops here. This is solely and wholly for ecosystem restoration, so that the biota, the creatures, the animals that live in this area can live their full lives, just as human beings would hope. They can live their full lives, they can reproduce without being harvested or cropped or killed or whatever. That's the whole idea of reserves going back quite a long time now. The whole idea of national parks, for instance. So we've left a question mark and grey areas all around that because of this legislation. And I suspect that in some ways it's deliberate, so that you've created a precedent where not only do you have customary fishing in a high protected area, but also commercial fishing. Not a good precedent and not a good look, really, to the world in a field in which New Zealand was once the leader.
Critics point the finger at the Minister for Oceans and Fisheries, saying he turned what should have been a celebration for the country into a damp squib.
But sadly, Mr. Speaker, New Zealand First have ruined what should have been a happy story for the National Party at the last minute by allowing Shane Jones to lobby the Minister of Conservation after he himself had been lobbied by the fishing industry.
Some critics are saying that this is just Shane Jones looking after his mates. What do you say to that?
To be fair to the ministers, they said that they allowed what they call ring net fishing because they were concerned about inexpensive fish products for the low-income people of South Auckland. That's what they said, but I don't believe that for 1 minute. And ironically, given this is an area also, the Carwell area, it is set aside also for customary fishing. And interestingly, that area was, the shark fishery in that area was very much a traditional customary fishing area back in the 19th century and hundreds of years before that. So I don't think the pretext or the excuse is actually credible, and probably, unfortunately, the scenario you outlined is probably the way things are. Politics as usual, it seems, unfortunately.
Positives, though. Mike, give us the positives of this new bill and what you like about it.
I'm very critical of the bill, but ironically, there are some very good things in it. And the very good thing, really, for marine conservation is the significant expansion of those 2 marine reserves. So we have to be grateful for that and appreciate it. The Cape Rodney to Okakari Point, our first marine reserve, was extremely well chosen back in the 70s because it's proven to be an important breeding area for snapper in particular, and no doubt a whole lot of other biota, including codra or crayfish. And so that is a big win, I think. I'm not so familiar with the scale of the expansion of the Whanganui-a-Hei Marine Reserve, but any increase in no-take for everyone protected areas, I think is a real plus for our hard-pressed marine ecosystems.
Mike says as a youngster he was taught that the intertidal zone around the coast is where life began, so it needs to be protected.
And so the marine habitat along our coast is so important and such a wellspring of life and biological diversity, and therefore it's as it is under severe pressure. And some people talk about a crisis. I used to think that was a little bit exaggerated, but from my own observations living by the coast for some years now, I can see a decline in the visible marine life and the interactions of seabirds and the boil-ups that used to be more common. I think that the pressure is actually getting towards the crisis stage, certainly. So anything that we can do to turn that around is a good thing. And so this is a start. But frankly, it's not nearly enough. And we need to have more no-take marine reserves. We're still less than 1% of the marine space in the Hauraki Gulf alone, and that's just not good enough.
Professor Simon Thrush says to make this new law work, it's crucial that people get with the program.
The big problem we've had in implementing marine protection has been this not in my backyard mentality and seeing marine protection as of very small areas of our marine estate as the thin end of the wedge in terms of the people's perception of their rights. And I think if we can accept that there are multiple values and multiple users in these spaces, then that will really help people accept that they're there, that they're a good thing, and that's probably the most useful thing we do. We do need to think about policing these areas. That's going to be an issue, but there's all kinds of new technology that can come into play to help with those things. So it doesn't mean that we actually need, people on the water policing them. And there are many opportunities of making that happen in a cost-effective way.
Forgive my ignorance on this, Simon. So these new laws come into place. Are there not people out there making sure that recreational fishers don't go in there or that commercial fishers don't go in the wrong areas? How is that policed?
The policing of these areas is officially done through the Department of Conservation, and they do have staff that keep an eye on these spaces. A lot of it requires on reporting from the public, though. It's a big area. We don't have eyes everywhere. That's why the technology comes into play. And so having people respect these places is really the critical element to its success.
That's it for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. Thank you to Simon Thrush and Mike Lee. This episode was produced by Gwen McClure and engineered by Mark Chesterman. I'm Amanda Gillies. Matua.